Okay. I am at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum. Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th president of the United States. He served from 1877 to 1881. And actually, in addition, here, let me flip the camera. In addition to his, squirrels. In addition to his library and museum, which is right here, they also have his house here, which I'm going to take a tour of here in about a half an hour. But Rutherford B. Hayes, let me switch the camera back. Rutherford B. Hayes, if you think that what election was it, with 2000? Yeah, 2000 with the hanging chads. If you think the election of 2000 was nuts, or if the election of 2020 was nuts, take a look at the election of 1876. Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote relatively convincingly, especially considering how few people voted at the time. He lost by like 250 or 300,000 votes, a decent amount. And he probably should have lost the election. He had, I forget what the number was, but he was one, Samuel Tilden was the guy that Hayes ran against. Tilden was one electoral vote short of winning. The best that Hayes could do was tie in the Electoral College, which then that throws the election to Congress, and Congress picks the president, according to the Constitution. If the electoral vote is tied, Congress picks the new president. At the time, Congress was pretty much completely Republican. This was 10 years after the Civil War. Congress was Republican. So if Hayes could get the election to the Congress, he would be president, even having lost the electoral vote, or having lost the popular vote, and really probably should have lost the electoral vote too. What ended up happening was there were four states, and they were all, I forget the states, it was like Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, all former Confederate states that had recently been readmitted to the Union and were still subject to Reconstruction rules. There were 4 states that were in dispute. So I forget what the actual number was, but Hayes was had to carry all 4 of these disputed states, and there was something wrong, and I don't remember the details. There was something wrong with one elector in Oregon, of all places. And the Republicans, there was a whole bunch of backroom, smoky room bullshit. The Congress wouldn't accept the electoral votes until they had come up with a way to resolve these 4 disputed states, these 4 former Confederate, recently readmitted disputed states. So what they did was they called it an election commission. And this was something they had to negotiate how to set this up. And what they ended up doing was they set it up. There's 15 people on this commission who was going to decide these 4 disputed states and this one, whatever happened in Oregon. I don't remember the details of what happened in Oregon. The election commission consisted of 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 1 independent. The 1 independent was a Supreme Court justice. It was 5, I forget how this goes now, 5 senators, 5 congressmen, and 5 Supreme Court justices was the 15 people on this election commission. One of the Supreme Court justices was an independent. So you had 7, and then the 1, the independent. And the independent guy was a Supreme Court justice who originally came from Illinois. And the Democrats thought they would be swift about this, and they offered, and I don't remember what the job was. They offered this guy a job. I don't remember what it was. I can't remember the guy's name either. But there was a guy, the independent guy, the Democrats offered him a job, thinking that and the job wasn't going to start, it was like an appointed position, it wasn't going to start for 6 months or something. And they figured that, okay, we're going to offer this guy this job, and that'll sway him towards voting for Tilden, for Democrats. And that backfired pretty badly, which is why we don't have a President Samuel Tilden Presidential Library and Museum. Sit down. They offered this guy this job, and he accepted the job and immediately resigned both from the Supreme Court and from this Electoral Commission. Done. And since he was from Illinois, the Illinois legislature got to pick his replacement. And they picked, since the Illinois legislature, the land of Lincoln, the Illinois legislature at the time was almost completely Republican. Guess what they did? They picked a Republican to replace this guy. So you've got 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And every single, as had to happen, every single disputed electoral vote from the 4 states in Oregon went to Hayes, which kicked the election to Congress, which picked Hayes. And that's why you had a President Rutherford B. Hayes. I'm sure that in addition to that, there was a whole lot of backroom dealing and smoky room stuff. And, being that these 4 states were former Confederate states, a lot of them, at least a couple of them, I would imagine. I know South Carolina was. I believe Louisiana was as well. We're still occupied by federal troops as a part of the Reconstruction efforts. I'm sure a lot of backroom deals were made. A lot of handshakes were made. And one of the things Hayes ended up doing was he ended up pulling federal troops out of all the former Confederate states, ending Reconstruction probably before the job was done. You can argue whether or not that's Hayes' fault. I think that no matter who won that, I think Tilden was probably going to have to pull troops out too. The North was just tired of Reconstruction at that point. They wanted it to be over. The Civil War was 10 years ago at that point. They wanted to be done with it. But yeah, that's how Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote pretty convincingly, and probably, actually definitely, should have lost the Electoral College vote, except for some smoky backroom handshake deals and political maneuvering that ended up costing Tilden the presidency and giving it to Hayes. Hayes did promise, I don't know if he promised during the campaign or if he promised after this whole mess, but he promised not to run for re-election, and he kept that promise. He did not run for re-election. So his tomb is right over here, so we'll walk while I talk. This is the grave of Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th President of the United States. It's actually buried, that's his house right there, and then he's buried back here. I assume his wife is back here as well. Looks like maybe we can get in this fenced-in area. We're going to take a walk over and see. But yeah, Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes was probably the, I don't want to call it lucky, because he wasn't lucky. He just, his people and his party did the work and did the backroom deals and did the handshakes and whatever else they had to do to get their man elected, and they did. They got their man elected. He is ranked usually definitely in the bottom half. Tomb pathway, oh, I don't care. Definitely in the bottom half of presidents. He's probably not ranked like anywhere near the bottom. He was fine. I think the big thing he did, Rutherford B. Hayes, Burchard was his middle name. I never knew that. Died in 1893. He's usually ranked somewhere near the bottom of presidents. After all the work and maneuvering that went into getting him elected president, he had a relatively nondescript presidency. Actually, looks like his actual grave is back here. He had a relatively nondescript presidency. He was a governor of Ohio before he was president. Oh no, who are these guys? This must be his kids, huh? Yeah, it's probably his son and his daughter-in-law, maybe? Colonel Webb Cook Hayes. 1856 to 1934. Mary Miller Hayes, April 11th to March 13th. This must be his kids. Let's see if this stone says who these people are. But, yeah, this is his kid, Webb C. Hayes, Mary Miller Hayes. So his son and daughter-in-law. Hayes' presidency was relatively nondescript, other than ending Reconstruction and attempting to... There's a skunk around here. Smells. Ending Reconstruction and attempting to put the country back together. He really didn't accomplish a whole hell of a lot. He had to deal with some Indian, some American, some Native American things. He was a staunch abolitionist. He had been an abolitionist, before the Civil War. He had always sided with abolitionist causes. And then as president, he did everything he could to promote the welfare of African Americans while in office. And then after he left office, that was something that kind of ran through his whole life, was abolitionism and equal rights. So in that respect, he was, obviously a decent human being. But as a president, he left a lot to be desired. And it isn't like, when you win the presidency the way he won the presidency, it's not like you got some mandate to do what you want to do. If anything, you almost have an anti-mandate. There we go, grave in the background. So yeah, he was a president. He served in office. I think probably the real story of Rutherford B. Hayes is how he won the job, as opposed to how he did once he got the job. Because once he got the job, he was fine, I guess. As an interesting side note, though, my great-grandfather, George Daniel Chafee III, I believe it was an elector from Illinois for Rutherford B. Hayes. He was one of the Illinois Electoral College votes for Rutherford B. Hayes. Was my great-grandfather, was my grandpa's dad. He died. My grandpa's dad was born in 1850 something, I believe, and died in 1926. So he was an elector for Rutherford B. Hayes from Illinois. He was not one of the disputed ones. Illinois was solidly for Hayes. But yeah, so that's it. The 19th president of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes. The guy who won probably, there were a couple. The election, the one that John Quincy Adams beat Andrew Jackson in was pretty hotly contested and was pretty controversial. And 2000 was controversial, but we think of 2000 as, oh my God, it was so close. It was nothing like 1876, or when was John Quincy Adams? Was that 1826, 1824, something like that? Andrew Jackson won in 1834, so maybe it would have been 1830. Whenever Andrew Jackson lost to John Quincy Adams, that election was insane. The 1876 election was insane. There have been several insane elections, and in the grand scheme of things, the two big recent ones, 2000 and 2020, not that insane. So yeah, that is the grave of Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th president of the United States, served from 1877 to 1881, and was the winner of one of the craziest elections we've ever had. Have a good day, everyone. So I am recording this offline. I'll upload it in a little bit here. I just took the tour of the Hayes home, and I went through the museum, which is over here, and it turns out that I had several of my facts wrong about the election of 1876. I read a book about the election of 1876. It's got to have been in high school. So I was pulling, squirrel. Where's he at? Squirrel. I was pulling my facts from a memory that was 40-something years old, and I got a few of them wrong. The election of 1876 was not decided by Congress. There was an odd number of electoral votes. So the election commission assigned the electoral votes, and Hayes ended up winning the Electoral College because of the Electoral Commission. So I had said that Congress turned the election. Congress didn't do it. It was this Electoral Commission. The guy who, his name was David Wise, I believe it was. There was the guy from Illinois who was the Supreme Court Justice who flipped. The Illinois Democrats offered him a spot in the state Senate, Illinois state, or no, U.S. Senate, and that's the job they offered him that he ended up resigning immediately. They did not expect him to do that. And then the last thing that I got wrong was that, what was it? There were 3 things I got wrong. Oh, there are only 3 former Confederate states. It was South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. There was only, I said there was 4. There was only 3. So it was the 3 states and then the 1 in Oregon. And Hayes won Oregon. One of the electors was disqualified. So they had to pick a new elector. That seems like that would be relatively straightforward. Hayes won Oregon, going away. Find another Republican to vote for him. So that one was not. So it was the 3 Confederate states, and all 3 of them were under Republican Reconstruction governments. And there was something called, and I don't think I mentioned this in my original video, something called the Compromise of 1877, which is where Southern Democrats and moderate Republicans got together and they agreed that if the election went to Hayes, that Hayes would promise to end Reconstruction and pull the troops. That was probably going to happen anyway. Tilden had kind of said he was going to do that anyway. So it wasn't that big a compromise necessarily. But that was something I don't think I talked about in my first video. So just a few corrections to my faulty memory.